Let's kick it off with the Celtics and the Magic, two teams that you know very well. These two teams on a two-game series over the weekend. I like how the NBA is setting up these two-game matchups. I really like that. Number one, yes, you limit the travel, but you get to see after a first game what are the adjustments that the losing team makes. What sticks out, what's different, what's trending. I like how the league has set up those two-game matchups. But either way, in this one, it was all Boston. And in the first matchup between these two, the Celtics went small ball totally. No Porzingis, no Horford, no Luke Cornett, and their offense was still humming. Second game, you had those guys come back, and their offense is still humming, man. What were your takeaways from this weekend's matchup between the Celtics and the Magic from the Boston standpoint? Let's start there.
Yeah, this Celtics team is just so much fun to watch, and they're dominant at home. Right now, they're undefeated on the season, 14-0 at TD Garden. I just don't know how you beat this team at home because the home court advantage is excellent. I think I'm not super surprised the Magic lost these games. They've really struggled on the road. They've been much better at home this season than they have on the road. They're 5-7 on the road this season, 11-2 at home. So two teams that are much better at home, I would argue. I mean, obviously Boston, they're pretty good on the road too, but these teams are both dominant at home. This is a big win for Boston, though, because the Magic had won 4 straight against the Celtics team, including a few weeks ago, a blowout 17-point victory. I think this Magic team really gets up for games against Boston because not only is it like a great litmus test of where they are as a team, Paolo Banchero, I've talked to him about this. He said that, Jason Tatum was his favorite player growing up. They have a really close relationship. I know that ever since Paolo committed to Duke, Tatum what kind of took him under his wing and really helped him. He helped him find an agent during the pre-draft process, helped him find a sneaker deal, and that's why Paolo ended up going with Jordan Brand, which Tatum also is under. So these guys are close, and I think Paolo really looks forward to these games because not only are they friends, it's like a friendly rivalry kind of thing, and again, it's favorite player, so he really gets up for these games and wants to prove himself against his favorite player. So yeah, I mean, I think the Magic are a tough matchup for the Celtics team. And that's something that Jaylen Brown actually told me a few months ago. He talked about just the length and the size, the physicality of this Orlando team. And so I think Boston, I mean, they've been frustrated after these recent Orlando losses. The Magic they're very annoying. They have a lot of pests on their team, and their defense, their hustle, the effort's always there. So I think the Celtics team, it definitely was a statement win for them. They really wanted to get a victory, 2 victories over this Magic team, and they were able to do it. So I do think it's a combination of Orlando not quite being a good road team just yet, just especially with how young they are. But for Boston, I mean, the fact that they're undefeated at home says a lot. And I just love this team. I mean, one thing that stood out to me was the Magic seem to have stretches where one guy takes over. Like Paolo was incredible in the first half last night. He really got hot there, especially in the second quarter. And then there's certain games where like Franz takes over or Cole Anthony takes over. This Celtics team just seems like they're so well-rounded. And, you never know who's going to score the next basket. They have so many weapons that they can hit you with. It doesn't ever feel like one guy's kind of taking over. It just feels like the offense as a whole is kind of humming, and they kind of spread it around. So yeah, this team is very scary. I think they're the best team in the Eastern Conference right now, and I'm not super surprised that they won both these games.
That was my very next point that I was going to bring up is, this Boston team, they're 19-5 right now. Similar start to last year, but I think one of the biggest differences between last year and this year as to why I feel like this is a sustainable, formidable force is that they can hit you in so many different ways. I mean, yes, it starts with their superstars in Tatum and Brown and the way that they can set the tone for the team. But, their starting 5, when they're healthy with Porzingis, I think they're like second in net rating right now with teams with more than 200 minutes. I think they're only trailing Philadelphia. With Porzingis, you have 5 guys that can put the ball on the floor, 5 guys that can create for themselves, and that offense just continues to hum. I mean, even without Porzingis, they're dangerous. Derek White, I mean, we talk about Tatum and Brown, but Derek White, he's a blur on both ends of the floor. Constant motion, constant energy. Defensively, he's a pest. He's a menace in that regard. I mean, I love the way that he's kind of just like that linchpin for that starting unit. And then off the bench, you have Pritchard playing very well. Hauser shooting the cover off the ball. I mean, it doesn't seem like this team necessarily has weaknesses, and that's why they're so dangerous as compared to last year.
Yeah, I know Tatum and Brown both had, 30-point games against Orlando, but really the top 8 guys in the rotation are stepping up and contributing. They're also a great two-way team. I think they're the only team in the NBA right now that's top 5 in both offensive rating and
Yeah.
defensive rating. They do it on both ends of the floor. So they may have fallen out of top 5 to like 6th on offense. They're right there. For most of the season, they've been top 5 on both ends, and they're the only team that can say that. So yeah, it's so tough. Even if you shut down like one aspect of their game or, one player, they have so many other guys that can step up and beat you. The depth is there. They just look like a really scary team. And I think also I always say this on my show, but I think one of the most underrated things in the NBA is continuity and chemistry. And obviously they made the Drew Holiday move in the offseason, but so many of these guys and the Kristaps Porzingis move. But when you look at Tatum and Brown, the role players there, a lot of these guys have been there for a while and they kind of have chemistry together. They know how to play with each other. And that makes it easier for guys like Drew and Kristaps to kind of step in whenever your focal points in Tatum and Brown have
Yeah.
been there for a
How about
while.
Horford?
So Horford, yeah. So I mean, I think that's a huge part of this too. I don't think it's a huge coincidence that right now Boston, you look at Denver, a lot of the top teams right now are teams that have that kind of chemistry and their focal points have been there for a while. So yeah, this Boston team has been so impressive. I think you're right about that's the biggest difference between last year and this year.
And so much in sports is focused on the end result, right? Can they get it? Can they win the big one? They came up short against Golden State, but I don't think we give them enough credit for year after year competing near the top of the East, hovered around Tatum and Brown, their growth, their development. And yes, they didn't win. They could have beaten Golden State, but Steph was truly magical, and maybe it's Golden State's championship caliber experience that got them over the hump. But I don't think we give enough credit for the Celtics for being there year after year. But with this team, what I think is very interesting is that as efficient they are from a shooting standpoint and dynamic as they are from offensively, they're still in the bottom quadrant in assists, right? And like 26 in assists, the 4th highest isolation frequency in the league. Is it still, yes, they have multiple guys that can beat you, but on a night where they're not shooting well, I still wonder, especially when it gets to the playoffs and maybe the threes aren't falling, I still wonder, how do they adjust when things kind of tighten up?
Yeah, I actually found a great stat here. NBA.com, shout out John Schumann. He actually said,
Yeah.
the win over Orlando was their second lowest 3-point rate of the season, and they still outscored the Magic by 18 points from beyond the arc. And 11 of their 12 games, or I'm sorry, here, when they've shot league average from 3, they're 12-0. I mean, so even if they're not completely lights out from 3, if they're just average, they're undefeated on the season. But again, 11 of those 12 games have been at home. They're a team that's much better at home than they are on the road. All 5 of their losses have come on the road. So yeah, I think this team, it's interesting. I think the fact that they have so many guys that can beat you is really what stands out. Just because, again, if 1 or 2 guys have an off night, they have other guys that can just step right up and kind of ended up taking over the offense. And again, defensively too, they're able to kind of lean on that. Yeah, every night, even if your shot's not falling, the defense is there. So I don't know. I'm really not worried about this team. The Boston was my pick to come out of the Eastern Conference before the season. And I think everything I've seen so far this season is kind of, I've just doubled down on that. I really think they're coming out of the East. And yeah, I think you're right too about the playoff experience. That doesn't get talked about enough, because not only is that super important when it comes time for the postseason, but you also know what it's like to kind of pace yourself throughout a season and prepare yourself for the postseason. Whereas a team like Orlando, that a lot of their guys in their roster have never been to the playoffs. So that's a lot tougher. They don't really understand what that's like to kind of get through a year and then still be ready for a deep postseason run. This Celtics team has been on so many of those now that I think that that's interesting too. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this Boston team. I'm excited about Orlando going forward too. I think the next step for them is to make the playoffs and kind of get punched in the mouth. And I think there's going to be so many lessons they can take away from a playoff loss. Again, this team, they're still extremely young. They're the 5th youngest team in the NBA. So the fact that they're playing so well this season, they're kind of ahead of schedule. And they're doing it with 2 guys that are 2 starters injured, Markelle Fultz and Wendell Carter Jr. So once those guys are back, and I think Fultz is the best facilitator on the team by far. I think that getting him back will really help, a lot of the offense, and he'll be able to set guys up for easy baskets. And then that allows them to move Anthony Black and Goga back to the second unit so they get deeper. But yeah, I think this team just really needs to get to the playoffs. There's so many lessons they can kind of take away from a postseason loss. If they win, great, and they can go on a run, even more experience. But this Magic team, it's been really fun kind of watching this development. And there's not many teams in the league that have two 6'10" point forward guys that can kind of create for themselves and others. Like, it seems like right now, a lot of their games, either Paolo takes over or Franz takes over, kind of like I was mentioning. They're at their best when both guys are playing well. And I really hope that they can do a better job of kind of putting shooters around those guys going forward, because that's going to unleash them a little bit more too, when it comes to their facilitating. So I love what Orlando has built, and I think it's really exciting watching such a young team play so well.
I think they're another team when you think about sustainable in terms of what they're accomplishing this season. And when I mean sustainable, I'm not saying, they're going to finish in top 3 in the East, but sustainable in terms of a team that can legitimately crack that top 8, and just this season being a litmus test season, not just like last year where they had good wins against Boston, they had statement wins and impressive wins against teams, but this year you really see them take another step up. And these losses to Boston, it's going to battle test him a little bit more. And I think that's what Jamal Mosley wants out of this team. You're seeing a tremendous amount of poise from Paolo Banchero in just his second year. I love the different looks that they can give you. You mentioned Paolo and Franz. Mo's kind of like that scrapper out there. He's that junkyard dog to do everything for them. I like the scoring dynamic that a Cole Anthony brings off of the bench. Jalen Suggs has been healthy so far this year, which is a great sign for them.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's like their emotional leader, even at a young age. You have Jonathan Isaac healthy, and he's trying to get into a groove. So I love this young team, man. They're trying to put something together here. As you said, shooting is certainly going to help them, but the experience as well and the chemistry with their coach on another year is going to help them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I give a ton of credit to Jamal Mosley for the culture that he's kind of built there, where it's hard with a young team to be a top defensive unit where guys are, never taking plays off and hustling. Like, that's tough with a very young team. And again, they're the 5th youngest team in the NBA, but they're also one of the best defensive teams. They have so much length. I think they lead the league in deflections and steals. Like, there's always a limb in the passing lanes, and they're frustrating to play against because there's times where they're picking guys up full court. The effort's always there. And again, this is a team that is doing this without 2 starters. That doesn't get talked about enough. Beating Denver, beating Boston, going on a 9-game winning streak. So the depth really hasn't been there either, but getting those 2 guys back will be huge, especially Wendell. He's huge because he's a great rebounder, great screener, but then also he provides spacing in the starting lineup because he shot almost 40% from 3 last year. So he can, space the floor a little bit, and that helps Paolo, Franz, the other any kind of offensive piece on that team really benefits from that spacing. So yeah, I think that this is a really fun team. And shout out to Jalen Suggs. He was someone that was like at risk of being a bust, and Magic fans were fed up talking about how he, was a waste of a top draft pick. And now he is, like you said, he is their heart and soul. He is excellent defensively. He's even starting to get some like defensive player of the year buzz. Like, he's not going to win it, but he'll get some votes, and it's been a lot of fun. I think it's always fun going to those games and just see him pump up the entire crowd. They get so fired up when he's diving for loose balls. He had like an altercation recently with Nikola Jokic, and the whole building went nuts. The building just, from that point on, they were going nuts. So it's a really fun team. It's not even just that they're winning games. It's a fun brand of basketball. And again, to your point about being sustainable, they're all very young. They're not going anywhere. Cole Anthony was recently extended. He was one guy that people were kind of wondering, is he going to move on? The only guy that's really up after the season is Markelle Fultz. And again, they have kind of his replacement already with, you look at Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony Black, who was a lottery pick this year. And then they haven't really used Jet Howard, the other lottery pick from this past season, because they're so deep. Yeah, he's been in the G League. So yeah, it's a really fun team. Mosley and the front office deserve credit for kind of putting this group together. Again, I really want to see them add shooting. Right now, it's not even if they're a bad shooting team. I mean, they're shooting a low percentage, but they attempt the fewest threes in the NBA. They're not even trying to shoot. Paolo's I think Franz averages the most threes per game on the team with like 5, but he's shooting 20-something%. And then Paolo's the only guy on the team shooting about 40% from 3. So when they actually get a shooter, and last year Gary Harris was their leading shooter, but he's not really shooting a lot this year. He changed over to the bench role, and he's still kind of adjusting to the new role. But if they had a shooter or two, I think this team would be much scarier. And I think that's what they thought Joe Ingles would be. But he's
Yeah.
been more of like a facilitator, coach on the floor type. But yeah, I think going forward, they could be a really, really interesting team like 2, 3 years from now.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And once again, we're talking to Alex Kennedy, NBA contributor for ESPN, also the chief content officer for basketballnews.com. So to everybody in the chat, once again, hit that thumbs up button for you boys, hit the like button, share button, subscribe to the channel, the NBA Report. One more thing on this game, a lot of talk, a buzz about what will Boston do at the deadline. Will they make another aggressive move to bolster the bench? That was the biggest question mark I had coming into the season was, I thought there was a lot of reliance on Peyton Pritchard and Hauser and those guys, and give them credit because Pritchard's playing very well and so is Hauser. He's shooting the cover off the ball. Do you think they get aggressive at the deadline and get a bench piece? A lot of people think of John Collins. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many buyers this season and so few sellers. I know Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports has written about that. And so I think you're going to have a lot of these teams, especially with the play-in. There's been way fewer teams that are willing to kind of just say, okay, we're not going to be good this year. Let's just sell off pieces. So that's tough. I know Isaiah Stewart was someone that has been linked to Boston. There was a report today about that they've shown interest in him. In Detroit, you look at just what's happening there. They're one of the few teams that you can kind of look at and say they're definitely going to be a seller.
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so few sellers that it's kind of tough. I saw the rumor about John Collins and, how they're kind of frustrated with him on both ends and that he might be available. But I do wonder what their asking price would be for him. I do think if you're a team like Boston and just how well they're playing, and you look at the Eastern Conference right now, I think this would be the year to kind of try to go all in and try to, make that kind of move to pursue a championship. But it's just tough trying to find those sellers. In the past, that was the one thing with the play-in. There was always so much activity at the trade deadline. It was so much fun. We'd all react to all the moves. And now it feels like there's a lot of rumors, but very few moves actually get done, which is kind of a bummer. But yeah, if they can find a trade partner and they can go add, especially like a big, I think, Collins, Stewart, those kind of type of players, it would make a lot of sense. I think that would be very smart of them.
True indeed. And, as much as Porzingis changes that team, the durability is always going to come into question. That's the only drawback with Porzingis. I mean,
Yep.
He's as dynamic as he's been with them. You just never know, especially with the lower extremity injury. So let's see which way they go.